Where's the money? Like, which areas have higher incomes, which have lower, and how does that all tie into the crazy cost of living?
Exactly. That's what we're diving into today. We want to try and figure out, which cities have these higher and lower approximate average incomes.
Right. And finding exact per capita figures is tricky, isn't it?
It really is. So we're mostly relying on median household income. It's a really good indicator, but important to keep in mind, it is household.
Good point. And this data, it's from 2021.
Yep, 2021. So it's a snapshot from then. Things might have shifted a bit, but it gives us a solid baseline.
Okay. So we've got two main sources we've been looking at.
That's right.
The first is the Metro Vancouver Housing Data Book, the 2023 version, that uses the 2021 census for median household income across 21 municipalities.
Yeah, it gives that broad regional picture. And then the second source, it drills down a bit more. Well, it actually ranks cities and even specific communities within cities by median household income. Also using 2021 data, also that median household figure.
Interesting. So two different angles on the same topic.
Exactly. And, sometimes the data might look slightly different depending on how they slice it, the methodology.
Right. Nuances. But hopefully putting them together gives us a clearer picture.
That's the plan.
Okay, let's jump in. That Metro Vancouver Housing Data Book. What did it say about the higher income cities?
Well, according to that one, Anmore came out on top. Their median household income was around $170,000 Canadian.
$170K.
Wow. And Belcara was right behind at about $166,000. Then Lions Bay at roughly $151,000.
Anmore, Belcara, Lions Bay. They're all pretty small municipalities, aren't they? More sort of secluded.
They are. And that's probably part of the story, thinking about the types of homes. They're often larger, detached properties.
Right. Maybe attracting more established, wealthier households.
That seems plausible. It could explain why, if you're looking nearby, properties in those specific areas might command a premium. It's about concentration.
Makes sense. Were there any others in that higher bracket from the data book?
Yeah. North Vancouver District was up there too, around $141,000.
Okay.
And Port Moody, about $129,000. So definitely in that higher range for the region.
So just to be clear, that's the median total income for households in those places in 2021.
Precisely. The midpoint. Half the household earned more, half earned less.
And you mentioned the size of Anmore and Belcara. Maybe having fewer households overall means a higher proportion fall into those upper brackets.
That's a really good point. It's not necessarily more high-income people in total than, say, Vancouver, but a higher percentage of their smaller population.
Right, the concentration factor again. Okay, so that's the top end, according to source one.
Yeah.
What about the other end? Lower median household incomes.
Okay, so switching gears. That same data book showed White Rock with the lowest median household income, around $80,000.
$80,000, okay, quite a difference.
Big difference. Then Richmond was next, approximately $86,000. And Langley City at about $91,000.
White Rock, Richmond, Langley City. Got it. Did any of the, the really big cities show up on that lower end in this data set?
Yes, and that's quite interesting. Vancouver itself, its median household income was listed around $94,000.
Oh, okay. So closer to Richmond and Langley City than to North Van District or Port Moody in this data.
Exactly. And Burnaby was similar, around $98,000.
So the big urban centers, Vancouver and Burnaby, are actually on the lower side compared to places like Anmore or North Van District, according to this specific source.
Yeah, it suggests, a really wide mix of incomes within those larger cities. Lots of different jobs, different wage levels, all averaged out.
Which makes intuitive sense. Okay, so that's the Metro Van Data Book picture. How does the second source, the one with more rankings, compare? Does it line up or show something different?
This is where it gets pretty fascinating, actually. Because it looks closer. Sometimes at specific neighborhoods, you see some big contrasts.
Oh, like what?
Well, for instance, this second source highlights the Dunderave community within West Vancouver.
Okay.
And it puts Dunderave's median household income way up at $206,000.
$206,000. But wait, didn't the first source put West Vancouver overall much lower? Like around $115,000?
Exactly. That's the key difference. The first source is the whole municipality of West Van. The second source zooms right into a particularly affluent part, Dunderave.
Ah, okay. So it really shows how averages can hide huge variations within a city.
Totally. Your experience or the housing prices you see can be dramatically different just moving from one neighborhood to another in the same municipality. Dunderave is a prime example.
That detail is super helpful. Did that second source flag other high-income pockets like that, maybe within Vancouver itself?
It did. It listed Kerrisdale in Vancouver at around $166,000 median household income.
Right, Kerrisdale, known for being quite wealthy.
Yep. And Point Grey, about $161,000.
Right.
South Canby, around $154,000.
So even within Vancouver, which had a lower overall median in the first source, you've got these neighborhoods with extremely high household incomes.
Precisely. It paints that picture of internal diversity. If you live near those areas, these numbers probably don't surprise you much.
No, probably not. What about North Van and Port Moody? They were higher in the first source. Did they rank well in the second one, too?
Yes, there was consistency there. North Vancouver overall was mentioned as being over $100,000 in the second source.
Okay.
And Port Moody was listed around $112,000. So the exact numbers differ a bit, source to source, but the trend holds. They're generally higher income areas.
Good to see that consistency. Okay, now let's flip back to the lower end. Did the second source also pinpoint specific lower income communities?
It did, and this really highlights the disparities. For example, it put Vancouver's downtown center area at about $67,000 median household income.
Okay, $67K downtown.
And Burnaby's Metrotown area was similar, also around $67,000.
Both major transit hubs, lots of density.
Yeah. And then Surrey City Center was even lower, around $60,000. Richmond Center, about $58,000.
Wow.
And the lowest figure mentioned in that source was Vancouver's downtown Eastside Strathcona area at about $48,000.
$48,000. That really shows the range, doesn't it? From over $200K in Dundurave down to under $50K in the DTES. Huge gaps.
Huge gaps, sometimes within the same city, just, a few kilometers apart.
Okay. So the big question then, the one that's probably top of mind for anyone living here or thinking of moving here, how does this connect to housing prices?
Right. That's a million-dollar question, sometimes literally here.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, these sources don't directly overlay housing price data onto the income data, but we can definitely talk about the likely relationship.
It seems logical, right? Areas with higher median incomes probably have more people able to afford higher prices.
That's the basic economic principle. Higher incomes generally mean greater purchasing power, which fuels housing demand.
And with limited supply, especially here.
Exactly. More demand chasing limited supply tends to push prices up. So it's a very safe bet that places like Anmore, Belcara, Lions Bay, Dundurave, Kerrisdale, Point Grey,
the ones with the high median household incomes.
Yeah, they almost certainly have significantly higher average property values, too. That's just how markets tend to work. You see it reflected in assessments and sales.
Okay. And conversely, for the areas with lower median incomes like White Rock, Langley City, or those specific communities like Richmond Center or Metrotown.
Oh, again, inferring here, but it stands to reason that housing might be relatively more accessible in those areas.
Fewer households competing at those very top price points, maybe.
Potentially, yes. The overall demand curve might be shifted down a bit. But, and this is a big but, we have to be careful.
How so?
Lower income doesn't automatically guarantee cheap housing, especially not in Greater Vancouver overall. And there could be other factors pushing prices up even in lower income areas, like speculation, proximity to employment, or transit development.
Right. So it's not a perfect one-to-one correlation, even if the general trend is there.
Definitely not perfect. It's an inference based on the income data, not a direct finding from these specific sources about prices.
Okay. So we're seeing these income patterns, we're drawing some likely connections to housing costs, but it sounds like there are some important things to keep in mind when looking at this data. Caveats, basically.
Absolutely. Several key ones. First, like we mentioned up front, it's household income, not individual or per capita.
Right. So a place with lots of dual income households might look richer than a place with more single-person households, even if individual wages are similar.
Exactly. Household size and structure matter. Second, the data's from 2021.
Yeah, things change. Interest rates, inflation, job markets. It's not 2021 anymore.
Precisely. So the current picture might look a bit different. Treat it as a baseline from that time.
And we saw clearly with West Van versus Dundurave, averages can hide a lot.
Huge point. Relying only on the citywide number can be misleading. There's so much variation within cities. You really need that finer grain look sometimes.
Which that second source helped provide.
Yeah. Also, things like population density or the main industries in a city affect the overall median income. A tech hub might naturally have a higher median than, say, a more service industry-focused town.
Okay. And maybe the biggest caveat of all.
I'd say it's that income figures alone don't tell you about affordability.
Right. Because cost of living, especially housing, is the other side of the coin.
Absolutely critical. A $150,000 household income might feel very different in Port Moody compared to, say, somewhere with much lower housing costs, even if the income itself is high for the region.
You need way more income to achieve the same standard of living here.
That's the reality for many. So higher income doesn't automatically mean better off without factoring in the massive cost of housing and everything else.
Okay, that's a lot to digest. We've looked at the data, the regional view, the community view, the potential link to housing, the caveats. Let's try and sum up the main takeaways for listeners.
Sure. So based on that 2021 data, primarily from the Metro Van Housing Book, places like Anmore, Belcara, and Lions Bay showed the highest median household incomes.
And on the lower end of that specific list were White Rock, Richmond, and Langley City, with even big cities like Vancouver and Burnaby falling closer to that lower end.
Right. Then the second source really emphasized those high-income pockets within areas like Dunderave and West Van or Kerrisdale and Point Grey within Vancouver itself.
And also pinpointed very low-income areas like the downtown east side or Surrey City Center.
Yeah, highlighting the internal disparities. And while we don't have direct price data here, we discussed the strong likelihood that higher income areas generally face higher housing demand and prices.
And lower income areas might offer more accessible options, but it's an inference, not a guarantee, especially in this market.
Exactly. So it's a complex. We hope this gives you a better map of the income landscape across the region based on that 2021 data anyway.
Yeah, food for thought. And if people want more current or detailed info,
Statistics Canada is always the go-to for census data, and sometimes BC Stats or municipal reports have relevant info too.
good resources. Okay, so maybe a final thought for people to chew on.
Yeah, thinking about all this, the income differences, what we know about housing costs, transit, schools, everything. What do you, the listener, think is the single biggest driver for where people choose to settle down in Greater Vancouver?
Is it just income? Is it lifestyle, commute, family?
It's probably a mix, right?
Yeah.
But what's the most significant factor in your view? Something to ponder.